Hey, George here. If you're getting your first Fujifilm camera and you're considering one of the kit lenses, whether that's the 18-55 or the 16-80, then this might be the video for you. Now, this isn't going to be a technical overview of these two lenses, as there's already plenty of YouTube videos that do that. Instead, what this could be about is my own personal experiences having used these two lenses over the past couple of years. I'm going to start with the 16-80 lens, as this is the first lens I got as part of a kit when I got my X-T4. Now, if you get this lens brand new, it goes for $800. I checked on MPB for used prices of this lens, and it goes for about $440. Now, this lens comes with the aperture ring, which goes from f4 to f22. It also has optical image stabilization, which gives you 6 stops of stabilization, although there's no switch to turn that on and off. Instead, what happens is that if the lens detects that's on a tripod, it will just automatically disable the stabilization. Now, I don't know how that works, but I've never had an issue with it. The lens is also weather sealed, so if it's raining, if it's snowing, there's not much to be concerned about. Now, it has a filter thread of 72 millimeters, so it's kind of on the larger side. It's also 440 grams, so there is some heft to it. Next is the 18-55, which I got as a kit when I got my X-T5. Now, this lens, when you get it brand new, goes for $700. I checked on MPB, and you can get this used for $340. Now, it does come with an aperture ring. However, there are no markings on it. And that's because this is a variable aperture lens, which basically means that the widest you can have the aperture at depends on what focal length you're on. For example, if you're at 18 millimeters, the widest you can have this lens at is f2.8. If you're at 55, the widest you can have it at is f4. If you have it set at 2.8 here, when you're at 18 and you start zooming out, the aperture will automatically start to change to 3.2, 3.6, and then f4, okay? So you cannot set 55 millimeters to be 2.8 or anything below 4. Now, it does have a switch for the aperture, so you can set to auto or manual. So say, for example, you're at 18 millimeters, but you want to be at f8. So you just set that to manual, and you just go ahead and turn the aperture ring, and you basically check what aperture you're at on your LCD or your EVF. This lens also has optical image stabilization, which gives you 4 stops of stabilization, and it does have a switch for it, so you can actually turn it on and off. That gives you a little bit more control. Now, you do have to remember to actually turn it off though, because sometimes I do find myself forgetting to do that, and so I always just have to remind myself to double check. Now, it has a filter size of 58 millimeters, and it's weight-wise is 310 grams, so it is much lighter than the 16-80 lens. Now, in terms of carrying these lenses around with you all day on your camera, I've had 2 consecutive family outing days where I had the 16-80 with me all day on one day, and the 18-55 with me all day on the other. And I will say that overall, I felt like the 16-80, although there was more range, there was more focal lengths I could use, it did feel a bit bulkier and harder to maneuver with. And by the end of the day, because I was using a sling bag, my shoulder was just getting more tired. And so as the day wore on, I was getting a little bit more and more sluggish using my camera, just because it is, much heftier compared to when I was using the 18-55, because it does feel significantly lighter. Now, is it ultra lightweight? No, it's not, but it does feel a lot lighter than the 16-80. After carrying this all day around, by the end of the day, I still feel fine. It's light enough that it didn't really tire me out, unlike the 16-80. So if you were to use these lenses, all day on your camera, I think the weight does become a factor at the end of the day, so that's something to take into consideration. So if I can only pick one lens out of these two, which one would I pick? Well, I would actually go with the 18-55. And the primary reason for that is actually because of the size and the weight. As a kit lens for your first Fujifilm camera, the main thing is you want to make sure that you actually go and use your camera, right? Like, you just spent all this money buying this camera, you want to make sure you actually use it. And I would just say from my experience, now again, I'm not a professional photographer, okay? I'm a hobbyist, I'm an enthusiast, and I kind of assume you're the same. Because if you made it this far in this video, I kind of don't believe you're a professional, just because why else would you be watching a video about kit lenses, right? So if you're like me and you're shooting, friends and family, you know, maybe pets, you know, things like that. Maybe some street photography, maybe some travel photography. Well, then this lens is going to satisfy almost all of your use cases. You know, the only downside is the weather sealing, right? It's not weather resistant, but I think the odds of shooting this in bad weather is not very high. And even if it was, you know, raining outside or something like that, like usually, you know, when I'm in that situation, I mean, I usually have an umbrella with me. So, you know, under the umbrella, using this to shoot with, it's fine, right? Now, if I didn't have an umbrella and it was just kind of drizzling, like I'm not really that concerned with this getting a little bit, you know, raindrops on it. But I mean, if it was really raining, then normally actually I just put the whole camera away anyways, right? Like, even though my camera is weather sealed, I still put it away, even if I had this lens on, actually, right? Like, I'm just, you know, it's bad weather. Like, sometimes I'm just not interested in taking photos when the weather is bad. It's just a bit troublesome. Now, unless there was a specific reason I want to take photos in bad weather, but 99% of the time, I'm not shooting in bad weather. So this is the lens then I would prefer. And, you know, like I said, having the lighter lens just makes it so that you actually end up using it more often. It is more fun to shoot with if you're not lugging around something heavy, right? Like when I first got this lens, right? And this was my first lens, by the way, right? This was actually my first lens. And when I had this with my X-T4, you know, after the novelty of having a Fujifilm camera kind of wore off, this kind of just sat on my shelf for many months, because every time I thought about using it, I would think about, did I really want to carry this lens out? Because what I didn't want to happen is I take the camera out and then end up not taking any photos, right? Because I would feel like I just wasted all that effort carrying this around. But I don't have the same kind of feeling with this, right? Like if I take this out and I don't take any photos, I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel like this was a burden to carry with me. But I do kind of feel that way with this lens. So I just think as your first lens for Fujifilm, your first Fujifilm camera, you should go with something lighter weight. I also shoot with primes, actually. So these days I actually shoot with primes even more than I shoot with this lens. And again, it's just because it's lighter weight. You know, it's lighter weight, which just means I actually go out more often. So if I had to choose a zoom lens, then I would pick the one that is lighter weight. And so I think for you also, I would recommend you get the 18-55 as your first lens, right? Like I said, this was actually my first lens, and I'm suggesting this one to be your first, okay? So 18-55. Well, that concludes this video. Hope you found it useful, or at least learned something from it. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I plan to make a lot more videos like this where I talk about products that I've used, products I own, what I like about them, don't like about them, recommendations I might have, and things like that. So if those are things you're interested in, then stick around. Now, if you have different opinions from what I said in this video, please leave a comment below, especially if you also own these lenses. I'd love to hear your opinions. All right, with that, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.